There are people who enter a room and somehow, without raising their voice, without asking for anything obvious, leave you feeling smaller. Not because they harmed you in any visible way, not because they shouted or insulted or demanded, but because something invisible was taken. Energy is not loud when it disappears. It fades quietly, through conversations that circle without resolution, through expectations that were never spoken, through moods that settle onto your shoulders like borrowed weather. You begin to feel tired around certain faces, heavy after certain calls, unclear about why your chest feels tight. And so you question yourself. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you are imagining it. But what if you're not? What if your exhaustion is not weakness, but information? There is a specific kind of tiredness that sleep does not fix. It does not come from long hours or heavy work. It comes from a conversation, a visit, a message notification that makes the shoulders tighten before the mind has time to explain why. You may notice it afterward. You leave the cafe and feel strangely hollow. You hang up the phone and sit in silence longer than usual. You replay the interaction, searching for something obvious, a harsh word, a direct insult, a clear demand, but there was none. Only a subtle shift, a quiet imbalance. Energy drainage rarely announces itself. It does not crash through the door. It seeps in through emotional undercurrents, through listening without being heard, giving reassurance without receiving understanding, adjusting your tone to avoid triggering someone else's mood. It is the effort of managing the emotional climate of a room that was never yours to regulate. And because nothing dramatic happened, you question your own reaction. Maybe you were overthinking. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe everyone feels this way. But sensitivity is not fragility. It is perception. The nervous system is always scanning, not only for danger, but for harmony. When a dynamic feels unequal, when attention flows only in one direction, when your presence is valued more for what it provides than for what it is, the body notices, even if the mind does not. You may find yourself shrinking slightly around certain people, speaking a little less, laughing a little more than you mean to, offering advice you were never asked for because silence feels unsafe. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. Humans are relational beings. From the earliest days of life, survival depended on reading emotional cues. A raised eyebrow, a delayed response, a sigh. The body learned to interpret these signals quickly, automatically. So when someone consistently centers their pain, dismisses your experience, competes with your joy, or subtly tests your boundaries, your system adjusts. It works harder, it calculates faster, it anticipates more. That extra work costs energy. You may not call it that at first. You might call it being supportive, or being patient, or simply being a good friend. But support that only flows in one direction eventually becomes depletion. Consider the conversations where you speak for 10 minutes and they redirect the focus back to themselves. The times you share something vulnerable and receive advice instead of empathy. The moments you express excitement and feel it quietly deflated. Nothing catastrophic happens, yet something inside you dims. Energy is not only physical stamina, it is emotional bandwidth, the capacity to feel, to create, to think clearly. When someone continuously occupies that space without reciprocity, you begin to experience a subtle erosion. You may start canceling plans, avoiding calls, feeling irritable without knowing why. And then comes the guilt. Because they are not terrible people, they may even be kind in many ways. They may be struggling, they may need support, and so you override the signal. You tell yourself to try harder. But the body continues to speak in quieter languages, tightness in the chest, heaviness behind the eyes, the relief you feel when plans fall through. Relief is information. It reveals where pressure has been building. The first stage of understanding energy-draining relationships is not labeling others as villains, it is recognizing your own internal shifts, the moments when enthusiasm turns into obligation, when care turns into caretaking, when empathy turns into exhaustion. There is a difference between compassion and self-erasure. In balanced relationships, conversations breathe. There is space for both voices. Emotional weight is shared. You leave feeling seen, not used. Even difficult discussions feel grounding rather than destabilizing. But in draining dynamics, you become the container. You absorb, soothe, validate, explain. You hold the emotional weight so the other person doesn't have to. And slowly, without drama, you feel smaller. The subtle exhaustion is the first clue. It is not loud enough to demand immediate change. It does not accuse or judge. It simply whispers, something here is costing more than it gives. And awareness begins not with confrontation, but with noticing. The quiet noticing of your own energy. The courage to trust your body's response. The gentle acknowledgement that tiredness in certain company is not random. It is relational. And this is where the story truly starts. Not with blame, but with recognition. No one wakes up one day and decides to become exhausting. Energy-draining behaviors are rarely intentional. They are adaptations, old survival strategies that once made sense. To understand why certain people leave you depleted, you have to travel backward to smaller rooms, earlier years, quieter fears. Every child enters the world dependent, emotionally porous, watching closely, learning what earns love and what threatens connection. Some children learn that being loud guarantees attention. Some children learn that being fragile guarantees care. Some children learn that achievement guarantees approval. Some children learn that crisis guarantees presence. And the nervous system remembers what works. If a child grows up in an environment where emotions are ignored, they may exaggerate them later in life, not to manipulate, but to finally be heard. If vulnerability was dismissed, they may learn to dominate conversations. If chaos surrounded them, they may unconsciously recreate it because calm feels unfamiliar. What drains you today may have once protected them. Attachment theory offers a quiet lens into this pattern. Secure attachment teaches a child that emotions can be expressed and received safely, but insecure attachment, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, shapes different strategies. An anxiously attached person may cling, overshare, demand reassurance. Their fear of abandonment creates constant emotional intensity. You become the regulator of their anxiety. An avoidantly attached person may withdraw, deflect, dismiss your feelings. You work harder to connect, pouring energy into a wall that doesn't respond. A disorganized pattern may oscillate between both, closeness and distance, warmth and cold, keeping your nervous system alert and uncertain. None of these are moral failures, they are unfinished emotional lessons. But when unexamined, they create imbalance. Energy-draining individuals often carry an unspoken belief: someone else must stabilize me, someone else must absorb what I cannot hold. And if you are empathetic, attuned, or accustomed to caretaking, you may naturally step into that role. Because you learned something too. Maybe you learned that love means fixing. Maybe you learned that harmony requires self-sacrifice. Maybe you learned that your worth is measured by how useful you are. So the dance begins. One person unconsciously releases emotional weight, the other unconsciously carries it. Neither names it. In families where roles were rigid, the peacemaker, the achiever, the problem child, the invisible one, those identities rarely dissolve automatically in adulthood. The peacemaker grows into the friend who smooths over tension at every gathering. The problem child may grow into the adult who thrives in chaos. The invisible one may overextend themselves just to feel seen. These patterns are not random personalities, they are rehearsed responses. Consider the chronic complainer. Perhaps they grew up in a household where negativity was the only shared language. Complaining becomes connection. Optimism feels foreign, even threatening. Consider the constant victim. Maybe accountability once led to shame or punishment. Taking responsibility feels unsafe, so the narrative bends toward blame. Consider the emotional sponge, the one who absorbs every story, every problem, every crisis around them. They may have been the emotional caretaker of a parent long before they were ready. And so, adulthood becomes a continuation of childhood roles, only now the stakes are different. The consequences ripple through friendships, partnerships, workplaces. Energy drains not because someone is evil, it drains because the emotional labor is uneven. And the tragedy is this: most people repeating these patterns are not aware of them. The behaviors feel natural, automatic, justified. If they always needed reassurance, they won't recognize that constant reassurance costs someone else peace. If they always competed for validation, they won't notice how their comparisons erode your joy. Unconscious behavior rarely considers its impact, and you, standing on the receiving end, may sense something is off without understanding why. You may feel compassion for their past while quietly mourning your present exhaustion. Both truths can exist at once. Someone's wounds may explain their behavior, but explanation does not eliminate impact. Energy-draining dynamics begin long before you meet the person. They are shaped in nurseries, at dinner tables, in moments of neglect or unpredictability. They are reinforced over years of repetition. By the time you encounter them, the pattern feels like personality. But beneath every energy-draining behavior is an unmet need that never learned how to stand on its own. And until that need is faced directly, it will search for hosts. Often, it will find someone kind. Energy is not only a feeling, it is biology. Every interaction activates the nervous system. Every tone of voice, facial expression, pause in conversation sends signals through invisible circuitry inside the body. Long before thoughts form, the system is already responding. The brain constantly asks one silent question: is this safe? When interactions are balanced, the nervous system softens. Heart rate steadies, breathing deepens, muscles relax. You feel open, clear. But when dynamics are draining, the body subtly shifts into defense. Not dramatic defense, not visible alarm, just a low, steady activation. Psychologists call this co-regulation, the way nervous systems influence one another. When someone is chronically anxious, angry, self-absorbed, or unstable, your system attempts to compensate. It adjusts to maintain equilibrium. That adjustment requires energy. There are patterns that consistently create this imbalance. The chronic complainer. Their conversations orbit around what is wrong. Every solution meets resistance. Every positive turn is redirected toward a new dissatisfaction. Over time, your brain anticipates negativity before it arrives. This anticipation activates mild stress responses, increased cortisol, subtle muscle tension. You prepare for emotional weight before it is handed to you. The victim identity. This pattern centers on powerlessness. Life happens to them. Responsibility lives elsewhere. You become the rescuer, the validator, the witness to repeated injustice. Empathy stretches into exhaustion because the story never evolves. The nervous system becomes fatigued from constant vigilance, always ready to comfort, never witnessing growth. The narcissistic center. Not necessarily a clinical diagnosis, but a behavioral gravity. Conversations bend toward their achievements, their problems, their perspective. When you share something, it is compared, minimized, or redirected. This creates what psychologists describe as emotional invalidation. Over time, invalidation diminishes psychological safety. You speak less, you monitor your words more. Self-expression becomes effortful. The emotional sponge. They absorb every atmosphere yet release it into you. They feel deeply but lack containment. Their moods spill outward, filling rooms with unprocessed emotion. You begin regulating them, softening your tone, lightening the mood, adjusting your own emotional expression to avoid overwhelming them further. The silent competitor. Their envy is rarely direct. It appears as subtle comparison, quiet up-one'smanship, backhanded compliments. Success around them feels fragile, as if joy must be moderated to protect their pride. This activates self-monitoring. You shrink your achievements. You calculate your enthusiasm. The boundary tester. They push, gently, persistently. Small requests that expand, jokes that cut slightly too close, expectations that assume availability. Each yes stretches you further from your center. Each hesitation feels like conflict. The nervous system interprets boundary pressure as social threat, even when it is subtle. And finally, the crisis creator. Calm feels intolerable to them. Stability invites boredom. So emergencies appear. Dramatic conflicts, urgent problems, sudden upheavals. You become accustomed to unpredictability. Hypervigilance sets in. You remain emotionally braced. None of these patterns are inherently malicious, but they share one common thread. They externalize regulation. Instead of processing their emotions internally, they disperse them outward, and someone nearby absorbs the overflow. Research in interpersonal neurobiology shows that emotional contagion is real. Mirror neurons fire in response to others' expressions. If someone is perpetually stressed, negative, or unstable, your brain mirrors that state. Without conscious effort, your chemistry shifts to match theirs. This is why certain people feel heavy before they speak. Your body remembers. Over time, chronic exposure to dysregulated individuals can lead to emotional burnout. Symptoms may resemble anxiety, irritability, brain fog, or even physical fatigue. The body is not confused. It is responding to prolonged relational strain. And yet, because the strain is subtle, you rarely name it. There was no argument, no betrayal, no obvious harm, just a gradual siphoning of energy through repeated imbalance. Healthy relationships feel expansive. Even when discussing pain, there is mutual presence. Emotional weight is shared and metabolized together. But in draining dynamics, the flow is one-directional. You metabolize what they release. You steady what they disrupt. You absorb what they cannot carry. The nervous system can do this for a while, but not forever. Eventually, it signals depletion, not from anger at first, from fatigue. And that fatigue is not random weakness, it is the biological cost of imbalance. Understanding these patterns is not about labeling people as toxic, it's about recognizing dynamics, recognizing what your body has been quietly tracking all along. Energy drain is rarely dramatic, it is cumulative, and the body keeps score. Leaving is rarely the hardest part. Seeing clearly is. Because by the time you recognize that someone drains you, attachment has already formed. History has already layered itself between you. Shared memories, shared pain, shared laughter. And so the question becomes heavier than exhaustion. Why does something that feels so tiring also feel so difficult to release? Part of the answer lives in empathy. If you are perceptive enough to feel drained, you're likely perceptive enough to sense their wounds. You see the insecurity beneath the arrogance, the fear beneath the anger, the loneliness beneath the constant crisis. And empathy activates. You tell yourself they've been through a lot. You remind yourself that no one is perfect. You minimize your own fatigue because their suffering feels louder. Empathy is a beautiful trait, but without boundaries, it becomes self-erasure. There is also guilt. Guilt for wanting space. Guilt for feeling annoyed. Guilt for imagining life with less emotional weight. If they rely on you, stepping back feels like abandonment. If they struggle, your distance feels like betrayal. You begin to equate your exhaustion with loyalty, as if enduring depletion proves love. But loyalty that requires self-neglect slowly reshapes identity. You stop asking how you feel. You ask how they are coping. You stop noticing your own needs. You scan for theirs. And somewhere in this dynamic, your worth becomes intertwined with your usefulness. For some, this feels familiar. If you grew up earning affection through helpfulness, you may feel most secure when you are needed. The rescuer role becomes comfortable, predictable, even validating. Being the stable one, the wise one, the strong one. It feels like purpose.
So when someone consistently brings chaos or vulnerability, it activates something known. You step in naturally. You soothe, advise, absorb. And in those moments, you feel valuable. But value built on constant emotional labor is fragile. It depends on imbalance to survive. There is also fear. Fear that setting limits will provoke anger. Fear that honesty will create conflict. Fear that without your constant presence, the relationship will dissolve. Humans are wired for connection. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The body interprets exclusion as threat, so even when a relationship is draining, the prospect of distance can feel terrifying. Better the exhaustion you know than the uncertainty you don't. This is where trauma bonds can quietly form. Trauma bonds are not always dramatic or abusive. They can arise from cycles of emotional intensity followed by relief. After conflict or crisis, there is closeness. After depletion, there is gratitude. The nervous system becomes attached to the rhythm. Stress, then reward. Tension, then reconciliation. It feels like passion. It feels like depth. But often it's instability disguised as connection. You may also stay because you believe you can help them change. That if you just explain it differently, support them more consistently, love them more patiently, something will shift. Hope is powerful, but hope without reciprocity becomes burden. There is a quiet grief in admitting that someone may not meet you in the way you meet them, that your emotional generosity doesn't guarantee mutual growth. And so you negotiate internally. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe you're exaggerating. Maybe all relationships are tiring sometimes. Yes, all relationships require effort, but effort is different from erosion. Effort feels meaningful. Erosion feels diminishing. One builds intimacy, the other reduces vitality. Staying comes down to a single, tender question. Do you believe your energy matters as much as theirs? If you were taught, directly or indirectly, that love requires sacrifice, the answer may feel unclear. You may confuse endurance with strength, tolerance with kindness. But slowly, exhaustion accumulates. Resentment begins to whisper. Distance creeps in silently. Your body stiffens before encounters. And still, you stay. Not because you're weak, not because you are naive, because connection is sacred to you.
Psychologically, this moment represents differentiation, the ability to maintain your sense of self while remaining connected to others. Differentiation allows you to say, internally, your emotions are real, but they are not mine to carry. Before this realization, emotional boundaries feel blurry. You merge, you absorb, you internalize. After it, there is space. Not coldness, not indifference. Space. You begin to notice how often you anticipate their needs before your own, how quickly you silence your frustration, how reflexively you step into problem-solving mode. And instead of automatically responding, you pause. The pause is small at first. A breath before replying, a delayed text message, a decision not to offer advice unless asked. These are subtle shifts, invisible to most, but internally they are profound. Because for the first time, your energy becomes something you observe rather than something you automatically give away. You might feel discomfort here. When you stop overextending, some people will notice. The chronic complainer may push harder for validation. The crisis creator may escalate. The boundary tester may question your availability. And your old instincts may flare up. Guilt, anxiety, the urge to smooth things over. But clarity does not disappear once seen. Once you recognize that your exhaustion is patterned, it becomes harder to ignore. The body's signals grow louder. The relief you feel in absence becomes more informative than the tension you feel in presence. There is also grief. Clarity often carries sadness. You may grieve the version of the relationship you hoped for, the balance that never quite formed, the reciprocity that remained uneven. You may grieve the version of yourself who tried so hard to make it work. But within that grief is dignity, because clarity is an act of self-respect. It says, my inner world matters. For many, this realization feels unfamiliar, especially if you were praised for being selfless, especially if you were valued for your endurance. To choose your energy can feel selfish at first, but selfishness seeks to take, discernment seeks to balance. You are not withdrawing love, you are withdrawing overextension. You are not rejecting someone's humanity, you are recognizing your limits. In this turning point, something fundamental shifts. You stop trying to fix the dynamic alone. You stop believing that if you just give more, it will finally feel equal. And instead, you begin to observe. Who meets you halfway? Who respects the pause? Who adjusts when you no longer overfunction? The answers may be illuminating, because healthy connection does not collapse when you stop carrying it by yourself. It steadies. And this is the quiet empowerment of clarity. Not loud, not confrontational, but grounded. You begin to trust the fatigue instead of fighting it. You begin to see that energy is not an infinite well. It is a living system, responsive to how it is treated. And for the first time, you allow yourself to believe preserving your vitality is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Reclaiming your energy is not a dramatic act. It is not a speech, not a door slammed shut, not a list of grievances recited with trembling hands. It is quieter than that. It begins internally, with permission. Permission to feel tired without shaming yourself. Permission to want space without justifying it endlessly. Permission to exist without being in service to someone else's emotional weather. For a long time, your nervous system may have been attuned outwards, scanning for shifts in tone, preparing for the next complaint, anticipating the next crisis, monitoring the subtle signals that told you when to soothe, when to reassure, when to shrink. This outward orientation becomes habitual. So reclaiming energy means gently turning inward again, not in isolation, but in awareness. You begin noticing your body before entering certain spaces, the slight tightening, the shallow breath. Instead of overriding it, you acknowledge it. The body is not dramatic, it is precise. When you honor its signals, regulation slowly returns. Regulation does not mean becoming indifferent. It means remaining anchored in your own emotional state even when someone else is dysregulated. It means allowing their anxiety, anger, or sadness to exist without automatically absorbing it. This is differentiation in practice. Their mood can be theirs. Your stability can remain yours. At first, this feels unnatural. You may experience discomfort when you do not rush to fix or rescue. Silence may feel tense. Boundaries may feel sharp. But over time, something surprising happens. The world does not collapse. You discover that you can listen without carrying, that you can care without collapsing into someone else's narrative, that you can witness distress without becoming responsible for resolving it. Energy begins to circulate differently. Instead of pouring outward continuously, it settles back into you. You may notice small changes. Conversations feel shorter. Responses feel simpler. You stop over-explaining your no. You stop cushioning every truth with excessive apology. There is softness in this shift, not aggression, because reclaiming energy is not about punishing others. It is about no longer punishing yourself. Some relationships will recalibrate naturally. When you stop overfunctioning, others may rise to meet you. The chronic complainer may find solutions. The boundary tester may retreat. The silent competitor may soften when comparison is no longer entertained. And some relationships may thin out, not through conflict, but through decreased access. This thinning can feel bittersweet. You may miss the intensity, the familiarity of being needed, the identity of being the stable one in someone else's storm. But beneath that nostalgia is relief. Relief is not cruelty. It is evidence of alignment. Reclaiming your energy also means rediscovering what replenishes it. Time alone without guilt, conversations that feel mutual, creative moments untouched by interruption, laughter that does not require performance. You begin to measure relationships not by history alone, but by how you feel afterwards. Do you feel expanded or contracted? Do you feel clearer or confused? Energy becomes information, and slowly you trust it.
There is a quiet dignity in no longer overextending, a calm confidence in knowing that your presence is valuable but not compulsory, that your empathy is generous but not endless. This integration does not transform you into someone hardened. If anything, it makes compassion cleaner, more authentic, less resentful. Because when you give from overflow rather than obligation, your kindness is lighter. And when you decline from clarity rather than anger, your boundaries are steadier. The nervous system, once chronically activated, begins to settle. Sleep deepens, thoughts slow, the background hum of vigilance quiets. You realize how much energy was spent simply bracing, and now, without constant bracing, there is space. Space for joy without competition, space for calm without interruption, space for relationships that feel reciprocal rather than consuming. Reclaiming energy is not about control. It is about coherence, aligning your external engagements with your internal truth. You stop negotiating with exhaustion. You stop explaining away depletion. And instead, you allow a simple principle to guide you. Connection should not consistently cost your well-being. From here, something steadier begins to grow. Not detachment, discernment. There is a quiet peace that comes when you no longer need everyone to understand you, when you no longer need to justify your distance, when you no longer confuse access with love. Discernment is subtle. It does not announce itself with superiority. It does not harden your heart. It simply refines your awareness. Where once you entered every room open and unguarded, now you enter aware, not suspicious, not closed, just attuned. You notice how your body responds. You notice the rhythm of exchange. You notice whether your voice expands or contracts in someone's presence. And instead of arguing with those sensations, you honor them. This is maturity, not the absence of compassion, but the balance of it. There was a time when you believed that loving someone meant enduring them, that patience meant tolerance without limit, that kindness meant infinite availability. But now something steadier lives inside you. You understand that energy is not only personal, it is relational. It flows between people, shaping the atmosphere of every interaction. Some people leave you clearer than before. Some leave you questioning yourself. Some leave you inspired. Some leave you diminished. And none of this requires villainizing anyone. It simply requires honesty. Discernment allows you to see patterns without resentment. You no longer need to label someone as toxic to recognize that they are not aligned with you. You no longer need dramatic conflict to create distance. Sometimes less access is enough. Less explanation, less exposure, less emotional labor. The beauty of discernment is it protects your softness. Without it, empathy becomes porous. You absorb everything. You carry stories that were never yours. You lose the edges of yourself trying to accommodate the edges of others. With it, empathy becomes grounded. You can listen without drowning. You can care without collapsing. You can love without losing shape. There is also a surprising tenderness in this stage, because when you stop pouring energy into dynamics that deplete you, you discover how much you have to offer elsewhere, to friendships that feel mutual, to conversations